Good morning, Gamecock fans. Happy Friday. JC Shurburtt here in with coffee. Hope all of you had a wonderful week, survived the weather, got through the weather, the weather. It's January, and that's a point of discussion, I think, in these winter months. Nevertheless, hope you all are doing well. Uh, Going to talk a little bit about everybody's favorite subject, the offensive line in football this morning. You have to talk about it. It's a point of great discussion. I'm pretty sure that we will all discuss the offensive line many times between now and the opener of the season, and I am sure that we will be disappointed at some point about the offensive line play next year. And I say that looking sort of outside of the Gamecock bubble a little bit and around the country this past year in college football, about midseason, they were really mad at Ohio State about their offensive line. And Urban Meyer, and again, say what you want about him, he's a guy that a lot of people have a lot of opinions about, and a lot of it has to do with who he is, how he treats people, who he's coached, that kind of thing. But if you think about football and block everything else out, the guy knows what he's talking about. He is a genius as far as the game goes. He's a winner. That's why he wins. He's a little neurotic about it, if you ask me, but he has a podcast now. And so he's on there about midseason. And of course, he's always asked about Ohio State. And he has a lot of Ohio State and Florida guests. And, it's a good listen if you just like the nuts and bolts of football. And, the thing I really like about him, too, he's very open about how he talks about recruiting and sort of the issues in recruiting, where to recruit, what to recruit. I can appreciate that from where I stand listening to him. And about midseason, he was just like, well, everybody wants offensive linemen. They're hard to find. And he said something that maybe I don't necessarily agree with. Overall, I mean, the guy coached at Ohio State. You're right there in the capital of offensive line to your west and your east. If you go into Western Pennsylvania, offensive linemen. Ohio's got offensive linemen. You roll into the other Midwestern states, offensive linemen. I mean, some of those states like Wisconsin and Iowa, that's about all they've got. Really daggum good offensive linemen. So I don't know that I agree that there's nobody out there. And then he said something really smart about he always wanted his offensive linemen to be basketball players. I think that's brilliant because basketball takes some footwork. Footwork's important. Offensive line, defensive line too, for that matter. I think you could go through if you were a lower level school in Alabama and go hang out at some high school basketball games in the winter and take a bunch of the 6'4" power forwards or small forwards that probably aren't going D1 in hoops. But they're great athletes and they're really good at that level of the sport. And if they wanted to play football, you could redshirt them and develop them and probably have a pretty good defensive line wise. So that was smart. But he was talking and he just kind of made it. I guess he talks to other coaches. Everybody's looking for offensive linemen. So that's why my prediction is you're going to be disappointed. Defensive lines are too good these days and things like that. I'm not saying, though, and I want to be clear about this, I'm not saying that the way they performed up front last year from start to finish was acceptable. And I don't think Shane Beamer believes it is either. In the interviews he's given this offseason so far, when he's been asked about it, he said, we got to get better. Got to get better up there. Got to get better up there. They seem to be concerned about the interior and losing Rashawn Lee, Torricelli Simpkins, and Kamar Bell. Kamar Bell. Ball. Uh, it is Bell. I was right. I'm second guessing myself now because I've had name errors and times during the show, especially on days where I have this and then another talking deal. And then, I mean, yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'm getting old, folks. Anyway, don't want to talk about that. But Kamar Bell, that's it. I was like, I didn't. There were times I was pretty honest that I didn't think Kamar played all that great this year, and I didn't want to, throw on top of that with not even knowing his name. I mean, that would be terrible. But yeah, so they're concerned about that. And look, Simpkins is good, and Lee was a stalwart up front, so I understand they brought in three guys from the portal to compete on the inside. I also have expectations for Trevon Ball and Marquis Anderson still, and behind them Blake Franks, who we'll talk about at some point. Um, and I look at it, and Ball played a lot as a true freshman and was pretty good. And then there's the whole question about what do they do with Tree Babalati? Will Big Tree slide inside? If he slides inside, then hey, that's another guy. In addition to the transfer portal players and things like that, I do think Boaz Stanley from Troy has the inside track at center. I'll just say that, and based on the feedback I've gotten through the grapevine. A friend of mine has a coaching friend over there at Boaz's high school, and talking to some folks that are familiar with things at Troy, they think that guy was a steal. He was kind of under the radar. I mean, we didn't talk about it until he committed. So I do feel good about that. As far as the other ones go, Newsom and Sharp, they both have a couple of years. I don't think there's anybody that's just a one-year guy. So we'll see how they battle it out with the existing players. Beamer also mentioned with Jamie the other day that they wanted to carry about 17 total numbers. And so the numbers really are what facilitated, going into the transfer portal for some established offensive linemen. It's about the bottom line with the O-line and all five of them playing well. And in fairness, you can have an offensive line with four good players, right? Really good that do their job and grade out highly. And one guy is a weak link and the whole thing goes kaput, and that's just kind of what happens on the offensive line. I think some offenses are designed that way. The offenses that I don't think need to be run in college football, where everybody's got to do everything perfect. And I'm not talking about O-line. I'm talking about receivers. It's very complex and exact. And I think in college you can be exact in terms of route running and things like that. Do you run the right route, make the right read, go in the right direction assignment wise? But if your whole play is contingent on six different things happening exactly with college kids, it's going to be a disaster. And luckily for South Carolina, that doesn't happen anymore. So just to kind of talk about that a little bit. But the offensive line, it is going to be something that has to get better. If South Carolina is going to get to the playoff, and if South Carolina is going to meet what should be lofty expectations, which is a little bit scary. Last time there were these types of expectations in the offseason, the Gamecocks face planted in week one. It had a showcase game all to themselves. First game ever on the SEC network. Brent Musburger's in town. Kenny Hill, who ended up being not very good, lit the Gamecocks on fire at Williams-Brice. That was the beginning of a decade's worth of struggles with Texas A&M. That was the second to last year of the Spurrier era. Lots of things got undone in that opener. But look, there have been high expectations, and Carolina's been fine through the years. Between 87 and 88, very high expectations. Some back then you got the magazine, Street and Smiths, Athlons, all that. Some had Carolina as high as third in the country. I remember Todd Ellis was coming back. Harold Green was coming back. South Carolina had high expectations in 01 after the miracle turnaround under Holtz. They finished 9-3. South Carolina had high expectations during the Spurrier era after winning the East, and then the years to follow until we got to 14. So it's not like they've never had an off season of, hey, you're going to be pretty good, and then falling on their face. It's just the most recent one. I do think the 18 team, um, and I think with the 18 team, the reason that group probably did not do as well as a lot of people maybe thought, and it wasn't universal. Not a. I think a lot of people had Carolina second in the East behind Georgia that year. Some people maybe had them third. They finished 7-6. But you look at it back then. Carolina finished 9-4. They had everybody back on offense. They changed coordinators, and that was actually a good move to Brian McClendon, who had a really good offense. And you got the sense that that Georgia game was number 2, the week 2, and you got the sense that had Carolina having played them pretty well the year before in Athens, it's in Columbia. At that time, Georgia hadn't started just thumping the Gamecocks in the series. There was some history there. So reasonably, people were like, well, Carolina probably beat Georgia and get in contention and all that. It was the third year of the Muschamp era. And at the time, nobody had, people were actually pretty high on him because he had gone from 3 wins to 6 wins to 9 wins. And so can you get back to 11 this year? The same problem on a lower end because they did have a lot of injuries that really gutted the 18 defense through the season. There was a little bit more there, than they showed, but it was kind of the same thing as 14 in a lot of ways. Really good offense, inconsistent as it was at times, and then the defense though just wasn't up to snuff. It's actually, if it weren't for the offense having a lot of studs, Carolina's probably not 7-6 and in the bowl that season. So that if you're thinking about that, my point is, when we talk about off-season hype, but back to the offensive line, if this group, if this team is going to live up to the potential, the offensive line has to get better. It should have been better last year. I'll be honest. Everybody always kind of chuckles when you talk about the offensive line should be better, and then it's not. And then you start talking about the next season as far as how it should be better. This is one year, I'm not giving the group last year a pass. They were good enough to win 9 games. I mean, but it was a huge issue for most of the year with the sacks given up. Sacks aren't all on the offensive line. But then the bigger problem that I had with it wasn't so much the sacks. It was the lack of push in the run game at times. There were times they got it, and then there were times they didn't, and it didn't really. There was no rhyme or reason to why. Texas A&M, that was the best game they played. There were holes all over the place for Rocket Sanders and everybody else, and pass blocking. Settlers had to do some Houdini, right? But Carolina ran it on them. And there were holes and they were blocking. And that's a daggum great defensive line. Probably better than some of the other teams that had good days against the South Carolina offensive line. Thought they played pretty well in the bowl, especially pass blocking. But you don't know if Rocket had played. He's a lot more explosive than maybe Oscar Attaway. And that's nothing against Oscar Attaway. There's not a lot of players like Rocket. Maybe he runs a little further. I don't know what. It's hard to talk in those type of hypotheticals. Guess it's early, but I do think that there were times they played well, but it's got to be more consistent. And you can't go out there and tote a butt whipping every game. You're going to tote a butt whipping sometimes on plays. Just to be honest, but when you have 16 back there, what would normally be a disaster, and those disasters will ultimately come, he can escape. So that's and look, that's happened. Connor Shaw did that here, and South Carolina's pretty good on the offensive line under Spurrier. Eventually, there's talent in the room. There are a lot of big guys that can move, that are tough. They've got more that they brought in. It's time to be good. It doesn't have to be, when you talk about best offensive line in the SEC, even the best offensive line in the SEC is going to struggle on certain days. Texas probably had the best O line, according to everyone, in the SEC this year. And you see what Georgia's defense did to them in Austin. I mean, you're going to have, like I said, you're going to have bad days. But there are too many good players all in that room to not take a major step forward next year. Am I predicting it? No, I'm going to stop predicting that I mean, and look, I predicted last year they would be better, and they were. I mean, the 2024 offensive line was a lot better than 2023. We know why 2023 wasn't all that good because of injuries and things of that nature. But and look, I'm not going to predict that they will. I'm going to say they should be. It's on them. It's on the coaches and players and all that good stuff. The individual guys, the new guys, the old guys, older guys. It's up to them. I do know Shane Beamer has mentioned that it is a priority to be better, and if the head coach says it, I don't feel bad telling you I feel the same way. But I say all that to enter our player spotlight here on a Friday, and it's a good one. Josiah Thompson. I'm going through the 2024 class, and gosh, you just keep going through. And once we get done with 2024, we'll bounce off into more football topics here on Coffee. I think I taught a lot of basketball yesterday. Not as many people listened. So I'll stick with I'll stay in your lane, Shurburtt. Okay, I will, and I'll mention basketball and talk a little bit about it. But we're gonna kind of football and coffee. Maybe we could call it football and coffee. I like just coffee, But I think one of my friends actually that covers Texas has coffee and football as a podcast on their channel. Which, by the way, please subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Hit the free. It's free. It just helps us get the word out. But Josiah Thompson. So Josiah comes in early. He's a 5-star from Dillon. 6'7", 300. He's how you draw him up. And because he was from Dillon and because he was sort of, I don't want to say a lock, but South Carolina was way up there for him. I mean, it was, Clemson had him on campus, tried a little bit with him. Some other schools, Alabama, I think tried, but he was bound for Columbia early, and I think, whereas with Cam Pringle early on, there was a lot of Ohio State and Alabama and talk, and Clemson has been good at his school through the years. So that was a little more uncertain. So I think when Pringle committed, they're actually a little more, hey, way to go, even Blake Franks than Josiah. But Josiah was the big pickup. I mean, he ended up being an All-American in high school, 5-star prospect. Some had him as the top tackle in the country, and he gets to campus. And, there's going to be a battle. I think he was battling Tree, and he won. And so they made the decision, and he won it in preseason camp. And Carolina made it through the season, most games, with the true freshman at left tackle in the SEC. I told everybody last year when they were concerned about it, and you're right to be concerned. I mean, he didn't always play great. There were some learning moments for him last year, certainly, but the team survived. I mean, sometimes look, Notre Dame played for a national championship on Monday. They started a 3-star true freshman who actually probably should not have been a 3-star, but they swiped him out of Georgia under the radar out of, I think, Marietta. Their left tackle got hurt, or their right tackle got hurt. So going into the A&M game against Nick Scorton and all those guys, they put this guy in to start, and everybody's worried, including yours truly. And he holds up fine, plays well, and he ends up being a freshman All-American too. And they made it all the way. So sometimes it happens. It's never ideal. Don't get me wrong. You're not like, yeah, bring all the true freshman tackles. Come on, just bring them all in. We want one every year. No. But sometimes it works out. And it worked out with Josiah Thompson this year for the most part. I did think that when he got hurt at Vandy and Tree came in and then played the whole Missouri game, Tree played really well at left tackle. And that's kind of the conundrum because, as an aside here, you've recruited all these interior guys out of the portal. You have a lot of competition there. You move Tree in there. Does that make you thin at tackle all of a sudden? Is Tree a slide guy? Like, in other words, would he start at left guard, but if something happened to Josiah, he goes to left tackle, and then you put in another guy? That's happened, and that's common. Um, I will remind everybody though, they didn't cross train a lot this year on the offensive line. Everybody hates that, but NFL teams do it all the time. Most college teams, most everybody does. South Carolina was more of an outlier this year with not cross training on the offensive line. So back to Josiah individually, there's some things he needs to work on. I think he needs to get stronger, just like everybody else. He got stronger once he enrolled and kept on going. Stay healthy is another one. He got banged up toward the end of the year. Just stay healthy, take care of your body, all that good stuff. Get a little tougher in the run game. Not that he wasn't, but he's a big old kid, and getting stronger is going to help him. And excuse me, my dog was coughing in the background here. I can't really do anything about that. I hope he's okay. He gets a cold sometimes, but if you get stronger, you're going to be able to get more push. You're going to be able to handle folks better. Just continue to work and develop is basically the winter outlook and spring outlook for Josiah, and also stay healthy. I think South Carolina does have some depth there, like especially with Tree. If something did happen, I think that would end the Tree going inside thing, in my opinion, because I believe that Tree played good and well enough at left tackle to, get out there and South Carolina doesn't lose a whole lot, in that situation. It's going to be fascinating. Maybe I should do an episode just on Tree, because that question, to me, that's the question of the offensive line is, what are you doing to do with this guy? I think he's too good to not play. And I think they know that, the coaches. I just think that they decided early, hey, because he was a little banged up at the beginning of fall and things like that, injured and things. They went with Thompson. I in my opinion, they said, we're going to redshirt you. You didn't redshirt last year. It's a good year to redshirt. We got this. And then, fortunately, by the time Thompson had to miss, Tree still had 4 games to play, and so that was pretty nice. I think to steal a year and get it back. But that's the question now, I think, of the offensive line this whole offseason is where is Big Tree going to play? And I think he's good. I think he's a good player. Every time he's gotten in there, he's sort of surpassed expectations. He struggled at left tackle as a true freshman too. Gosh, think about that, guys. The last 2 years, South Carolina, for the most part, has started a true freshman at left tackle. Interesting. Or do you move? And I know some of you want to move Tree to right. I don't think it's going to happen. I think that's a Casey Henry, Jatavius Shivers battle. Maybe somebody else gets in the mix over there. Cam Pringle, somebody like that. But that's not my opinion. That's just kind of what I think will happen over there. And, Casey had some good moments, obviously. So Thompson, how good can he be? True freshman All-American this past year, coaches freshman All-SEC. I'll tell you this right now. One of my contacts at another school, the team that's on the schedule at Carolina, mentioned him when he was kind of scouting the Gamecocks O-line, and he said he's potentially special. So the folks the lineman people, the lineman coaches, the dudes that get in there and watch, we don't always dig into the O-line, D-line tape, do we? No, we watch the ball sometimes. I have to make myself do it. I'll sit down and say, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I almost wish I had a way to blind it and just focus in. But these are the guys that do that, and they love what Josiah brings to the table. And frankly, I do too. I think the sky's the limit for him. Offensive linemen don't get talked about as much as a Dylan Stewart, and certainly not a quarterback that was a redshirt freshman that set the world on fire down the stretch this year. But he is another one, folks, of that big 2024 group that they brought in. And some of that I talk about that group, and I'm spotlighting that group because I think right now is a good time to talk about the second year of a class, right? Because the first year everybody's talking about them anyway, and then the second year, you forget about some guys. You have some positions open, some spots open, and some of these folks that maybe didn't play a whole lot, or even if they did, you're counting on them for bigger roles this year. So that's why, if you want the logic behind focusing on last year's class, but he's just another big piece. I mean, you look at the group again, it was a small group. I've mentioned that a couple of times, but I mean, man, this guy, Dylan Stewart, Michael Smith, Malezio Bennett, Jalewis Solomon, Wendell Gregory is now a defensive end. I can't wait to talk about him. Fred Johnson. I mean, if you look at the number of blue chip players, not only that they were blue chips out of high school, but they've gotten to Columbia and been what they were cracked up to be, because that's important as well. You can sign all the 4-star players you want, all the 5-star players you want. Sometimes those guys aren't really what they were. Sometimes for different reasons, they don't develop. But so far, so good with this group. And Josiah Thompson is one of those players. I think, and it's funny because if you look at South Carolina's 2 5-stars they got in this class, and this is always it's not universally 100%, but when you think about the positions, if you can get a 5-star player, and really both of these guys, there's a strong argument they were the top whatever in their class. I think there's a little bit more of a conversation to be had when it comes to Josiah Thompson. I mentioned the kid at Notre Dame who wasn't ranked very high. And then there's some other ones around the country that maybe get in the mix down the road as far as top tackle in that class. But Dylan Stewart, to me, I mean, Colin Simmons from Texas would be number 2, but Dylan Stewart was best D end of the country. So when you sign 5 stars and one's an edge rusher, defensive end, that's a premium position, and one's a left tackle, that's a premium position, and you're in a line of scrimmage league, that's good recruiting, I think, as far as that goes. But yeah, so Thompson, back to him to wrap a bow on it. I do think he'll be the starting left tackle next season. That's a projection, or not a very bold prediction there, sir. But I think that he does, like everybody else, need to improve. Like everybody else on the offensive line, there's another step for him to make. He has not arrived. And so this offseason is going to be critical for him. If he does take that next step, I think big things are in store for this kid from Dillon, a young man from Dillon, South Carolina, home of South of the Border. Ever been to South of the Border? I went within the last 4 years. I was in North Carolina on a trip and got tired and stopped at that exit. Interesting place. Always, when I was a kid, we lived in Spartanburg, and my mother's from Myrtle Beach. So when we'd go to the beach, we loved that 378 way through Sumter and Tuberville and all that. It takes you out kind of in the bowels of Conway, and you're out there. We used that, but then when we went 95, we'd always get off the exit before we got to South of the Border, going that way. So I've always seen the signs my whole life, but I've only been there a few times. But anyway, that's Dillon, South Carolina, South of the Border, home of Josiah Thompson. So there you go. Big women's basketball game tonight, or this evening, early evening, right when you're getting off work, 5 p.m. Kim Mulkey and LSU, everybody's favorite coach, right? Come in, everybody's favorite team, LSU, come in to face Dawn Staley and the Gamecocks. I expect a pretty big crowd. out for that. National television, ESPN. And not as great of exposure as it could have been, but the weather, forced game day out. And, like I said before, that plenty of exposure for women's basketball, but should be a heck of a game. LSU 20-0. If you want an in-depth preview, go listen to the walkthrough. Joe Machika had Brad Muller on. Lots of people have. And then we're going to have Joe on Inside the Gamecocks, the show, with Phil and myself later today. That's our first guest under the new format. Also, could we add to the stupid list? That's a new thing. We'll also talk about anyone else that's contacted PRS, Pretty Record Syndrome, when they're talking about ranking college football teams. All right, that's going to do it for coffee this morning. I want everyone to have a wonderful weekend. Don't forget the Garnet Trust event right after the Mississippi State basketball game at Thirsty Fellow. You have to be a member to go. You're going to meet all the newcomers from the 2025 class, portal and otherwise. Somebody that's out there, shoot me an email if you see Justin Okoronkwo. Tell me what that guy looks like. I'm curious to see. But you get to meet all those guys plus the freshmen. If you're a Garnet Trust member, you can join Garnet Trust for $10 a month by going to the website, garnettrust.com, to support NIL at Carolina. All right, JC Shurburtt signing off. We'll holla at all you folks later on the show. Happy weekend, folks.